Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the preview for the 2025 Chinese Grand Prix. Oh yes, it really is race week once again, and for the first time this year, it's a sprint weekend. So following a chaotic race in Australia, which I'm sure you remember was won by Lando Norris, Formula 1 moves on to the 5.451 kilometre, that is 3.38 miles, 16 corners Shanghai International Circuit for the second round of the season and the second of 5 races in 6 weeks. It really is a busy start to the season, which incidentally is absolutely fine by me. There will be 2 DRS zones for this one, which will help drivers get some moves done, hopefully at least, especially down the long straight which leads into the turn 14 hairpin. Also worth a mention that the first zone is 75 metres longer than it was last year, so hopefully that's an improvement as well. The track itself has a good mix of both fast and slow speed corners, but the best spots to get a move done are down at turn 6, where Daniel Ricciardo made that fantastic dive bomb move on Valtteri Bottas in 2018 to snatch the lead and take the win, of course. Moves can be made into turn 11, but that would leave the passing car vulnerable to a DRS repass moments later. And as already mentioned, the hairpin at turn 14 is probably the best place to pass your rival unless you fancy going into turn 1 like a torpedo. For this year's event, there is one major change. In the summer of 2024, a brand new surface was laid down at the circuit and it was only used a few times towards the back end of last year. So it isn't a stretch to say that could be a bit of a curveball this weekend, especially when you add into the mix we only have one practice session for drivers to get up to speed and lay down some rubber. Now, F1 returned to Shanghai last year for the first time since 2019, but the sport has actually been racing in China since 2004. Yes, it's been that long. And over the years, we've seen some really great racing and some iconic moments as well. The race in 2010 featured a load of crashes, mixed conditions, and a lot of action. Well worth watching if you haven't seen it. Nico Rosberg took his first ever win at the track in 2012, a race which saw Michael Schumacher pull over to retire having been in the mix for the win, and led to Martin Brundle uttering the iconic line, "I haven't been this disappointed since Shrek 2. Something I can't relate to because I bloody love Shrek 2, but anyway. The race will also always be famous for the moment Lewis Hamilton, who had a chance to wrap up the Drivers' Championship in the race in his first ever F1 season, entered the pits on extremely worn wet tyres, encountered a slippery pit entry and slid off into the gravel and retired from the race. Oh, and who can forget going back to that 2010 event, the unbelievable moment Sebastian Buemi's front right upright failed and both of his front wheels popped off simultaneously and a meme was born. It is also worth a mention that 10 different drivers have won in Shanghai since its debut on the calendar, and that Lewis Hamilton has won the most of any other driver at the circuit, having taken victory on 6 occasions, his most recent win coming at the 2019 event. Yeah, you heard that right, 6 wins. Oh, and 6 is also the number of dry tyre compounds in the Pirelli range this year. Oh yeah, that's right, it is tyre talk time once again. You know you love it really. The compounds available for this one then are a step harder than last time out in Australia, and so they are the hard C2, the medium C3 and the soft C4. This one is a more demanding track on the tyres than Albert Park was, with the rubber facing a higher level of tyre stress, and as already covered, the track has been resurfaced, and so although the track should be smoother, we are going to get a high level of track evolution across the weekend. We may also see teams put in a lot of laps during FP1 to get as much rubber laid down as well as collecting as much data as possible ahead of sprint qualifying. When it comes to strategy, last year's race winner Max Verstappen made 2 stops, starting on the mediums and then running 2 sets of hards and pitting on lap 13 and lap 23. Although strategy was heavily influenced last year by full and virtual safety car periods. That said, 3 drivers did still manage to pull off a one-stopper, although degradation was quite high last year, so without those safety car periods, it may have been tough to make the one-stopper work. Also, it'll be the first time the race has been held in March this year, so things could, in theory at least, be a bit cooler. However, the weekend's forecast at time of recording suggests a fairly warm and dry weekend with temperatures potentially hitting 26 degrees C in time for the race start on Sunday, so an interesting weekend ahead, methinks. And your schedule for this one is another early one here in the UK, but not quite as early as it was last time out. The event kicks off with the one and only practice session of the weekend at 3:30 AM GMT on Friday, and that is followed by sprint qualifying at 7:30 AM. The first sprint race of the season starts at 3 a.m. with qualifying for the Grand Prix getting started at 7 a.m. And it is lights out for the race on Sunday, again at 7 a.m. And once again, that is in UK time. And in terms of support races, Formula Academy gets its season up and running in China. Now, before I get on to making some, let's face it, based on last week, terrible predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix, let's have a very quick run through some news stories and talking points ahead of the weekend. And there is one big talking point coming into this one. The FIA has confirmed that a new technical directive will be introduced in time for this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix in Shanghai. The governing body issued a technical directive in February warning teams that more stringent load deflection tests to the front wing will be introduced from the Spanish Grand Prix, and the teams were informed of a renewed effort to monitor rear wings ahead of last Sunday's event in Australia, with rear-facing housing fitted to cars to accommodate cameras. Although the FIA confirmed all teams had complied with the deflection limits at Albert Park, it was announced that it had found sufficient grounds for a tougher test to the upper rear wing to be introduced from this weekend's event. The change dictates that the rear wing slot gap must not vary by more than 0.5 millimeters when 75 kilograms of vertical load is applied to the rear wing main plane, and that's down from a range of 2 millimeters stated in the regulations with a tolerance of 0.25 millimeters. That announcement leaves the teams who were informed of the change on Monday facing a rush to make sure their cars meet the new demands. On top of that, the FIA is planning a further clampdown on flexi wings from next month's Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka. The question is, will this do anything to change the pecking order? Well, there's a good chance the order will change to a point anyway, because Albert Park is a real outlier of a circuit and there is no point drawing definitive conclusions from it. But specifically on the technical directive itself, we have seen in the past that performance has dropped off for all teams as they adapt, and other times nothing has really changed at all. So, as boring as the answer is, it could go either way. And as Matt Summerfield explained in his analysis for PlanetF1.com, even though the FIA have added an additional test this season and already modified its parameters, there's nothing to say that it will prevent the teams from continuing to take advantage of the effect that they're looking to regulate. So, as much as I'd love to give you an answer today, the reality is this is one of those let's wait and see things. Not long to go, though, until we find out. Just a couple of other things very quickly. A number of teams have had their freight delayed from Australia to China, meaning their preparations for the weekend have been held up. At least 4 teams, Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin, have suffered delays after 2 flights were delayed by up to 8 hours, and so the teams did not receive their cargo until Wednesday afternoon. That meant those teams were only able to unpack their freight in the pit lane and build their cars from 4 p.m. local time. The FIA stated that Pirelli did not have its freight at the circuit on time either, but the tyre manufacturer did receive its equipment on Wednesday. However, as of Wednesday afternoon UK time, there are apparently no concerns around getting cars ready for Friday practice, and the governing body has allowed the teams to break the curfew if they need to do so. So, FP1 is not expected to be at any risk of delays. It is also worth a quick mention that although not necessarily relevant to this weekend, Stefano Domenicali has been in Thailand to discuss the, quote, impressive plans to host a race on the streets of Bangkok. Another one to keep an eye on with the race a possibility and nothing more at this stage from the 2028 season. Right then, time to make some predictions, and as always, please do not take these too seriously. They're just a little bit of fun, but if you do disagree with my picks, then you can let me know yours in the comment section down below. And last time, well, it's certainly been worse, that's for sure. I got a point for Norris on pole and half a point for being on the podium but in the wrong position, and so let's just move on. Once again, last weekend's race was a bit chaotic and Albert Park isn't a totally representative circuit, so we have to be careful about drawing too many conclusions from that result. However, as the track dried out on Sunday, the McLarens looked rapid, and so with a dry weekend expected in China, I'd be surprised if they aren't possibly comfortably the team to beat. The Red Bull, at least in the hands of Max Verstappen, looked more competitive than I expected ahead of the season opener. Mercedes also looked very good too, and Ferrari will be desperate to bounce back straight away following their worst start to an F1 season in terms of points in 16 years. Wow. So I think we're in for a really good weekend actually, but whilst I hope it's close, I can only see this going one way unless we get chaos or the new technical directive really does mix things up a bit, and that is another McLaren win. I'll say it again, I want it to be Oscar Piastri for a number of reasons, but mainly because it would be good to see him bounce back following a difficult and disappointing end to what looked like a promising weekend at his home circuit. That said, I will keep hedging my bets in these early races until we get a bit more of a definitive order. So for sprint pole, I'll go with Lando Norris, but pick Piastri for the sprint win. And then I'm going to reverse that for the Grand Prix and say Piastri for his first actual proper real pole position, but Lando Norris takes the win in the race on Sunday. Behind the McLarens, or at least behind Lando Norris, I'll go with Piastri P2 and Verstappen P3, with Williams as top of the midfield, which will once again be the 5th best finishing team on Sunday. I'll also predict a lot less chaos and go with 19 finishers on Sunday as well. My separate boulder picks for this one are for Gabriel Bortoleto to outqualify Nico Hulkenberg for the second weekend in a row, Liam Lawson finishing inside the top 5 on Sunday, and Yuki Tsunoda picks up points in both the sprint and the Grand Prix. That is it for the Chinese Grand Prix preview then, but don't forget you can let me know your thoughts and your predictions ahead of the weekend in the comment section down below. And for the latest news, analysis and reaction from the world of Formula 1, head on over to planetf1.com. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean, this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.